consciously. It's just unconscious again.
But they voted for Ron Johnson.
Well, he's the moral leader.
He's the moral leader.
So there's the other thing. This goes back to what I said originally. Find the difference between moral and partisan on issues.
Okay.
You see this all the time. You know, Democrats taking a position, Republicans say, so take an issue like education and find out where the two moral positions on the issue are, conservative and progressive. Because you may hear a Republican talking like a progressive about public schools, and Democrats talking like a conservative. You hear that all the time. Democrats all the time talk about school to work initiatives, college ready, career and college ready. You hear them talking about that all the time. That's conservative language, conservative ideas. So find out where that moral and partisan difference is and identify the moral frame. So when you see a statement from a candidate or somebody, we'll get to this later after the break, find out which moral frame it's in. Then find out where biconceptualism lies on the issues. Right? You can find out that conservatives are biconceptual on education because they like this about their public schools. Find out where that is. Again, we're framing truths about what people think and believe. And then speak to those people in the progressive frame. The reason that's so powerful, as we'll find out later, is that the same message in the progressive frame can work on every issue. You can structure it to work in every issue. And what that does, it avoids these issue silos that separate us as progressives. So you're probably all going, oh, we're dead. We're dead. We're not going to win another election in my lifetime. But there is hope. And actually the cognitive science and the neuroscience, linguistics, psychology provide a hopeful vision for us in that we naturally evolved for empathy. Our brains are naturally evolved and structured for empathy. These things called mirror neurons. And it was discovered in the 70s by Antonio Damasio in Italy. And it was, George Lakoff tells the story really well, and I'm sure it's embellished, but it's really good because what he said, so they were doing they had the macaque monkeys, wired up to the neural sensors, and they were watching the screen as they were doing activities. And one day, one of the researchers went to get her, I think he said, lunch, and had a banana, and started eating a banana, and all of a sudden the machine started going click, click, neural activity from a monkey. And when she looked through the window, the monkey was just sitting on a stool watching her eat her banana. And through further study, what they found is that higher primates and humans have these things called mirror neurons, which allow, what it does is, so the same neural circuitry fires in my brain, watching you do something, as me doing that activity. So if somebody is running down the street, and I watch them run down the street, the same neurons are firing in my brain watching that activity as if I were out doing that activity. Well, and it makes sense. Why do we all love happy puppy stories? Right? Why do we all love watching little kids open birthday presents? Right? Why do we all feel like the earthquake in Nepal? Why did we all have this sense of empathy for what those people were going through? It's hardwired. You can't avoid it. It can be suppressed through, the constant self-interest frame activation.
surroundings of dolphins and whales is because of mirror neurons, where because they function as a social group, when one becomes ill and heads for shore, they all head for shore.
Interesting.
And the way they intervene in that is not to take all the dolphins and shove them back into the water, but to take a baby dolphin out of the group, take it a mile or two offshore, and drop it in the water again, and it will emit, I'm lost, I'm lost, I'm helpless, I'm helpless. And they will turn around and go to the baby dolphin to preserve that their empathy drives them away from the ill one,
Yeah.
the baby.
Wow.
Same function.
So,
Question,
yeah.
is my comrade to the left, she can't watch the image of Governor Walker because it sickens her.
Absolutely.
Is that mirror neuron response?
Well, if you were watching her watch that video, you would be able to physically sense her disgust at that video,
Yeah.
which then would trigger your mirror neurons watching her have that experience. Now, what's
But her
her response is because it's so antithetical to her moral certitude. It's so antithetical to what your deep core beliefs are that it disgusts you physically. So think of that response that you're having and think that there are conservatives who have that same response listening to Elizabeth Warren. Well, partially, but also because of the values that she's evoking. Yep. The other thing is, I talked about earlier, we unconsciously seek physical connections with the world and everything around us. And I would argue that all the technology that takes us away from the physical, personal interactions with people are also contributing to the death of progressive ideas. Because they are also allowing empathy to deteriorate. Because you have stronger empathy when you're in physical contact with somebody than you do when you're doing a text message.
Well,
No, there's physical. There's research on it. You have much stronger connections with people with physical interaction, eye contact, than you do on any kind of a device.
That's why community
that is
policing
true. I'm not
and-
questioning that.
Oh, okay.
What I'm thinking about is that people ask the question, why do people sit in restaurants with their children in front of them and text?
Pet peeve. That I hate
Why do
that.
they do that?
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is the most extreme.
I would agree. Yep.
The divorced dad is sitting with his 3 sons
Yep.
who are between the ages of 12 and 4.
Yep.
And he's texting.
Yep.
Okay, so why is this more attractive than his
Here's what's-
natural empathy for his child?
Here's what's worse. Doing that to a child under 4 is worse.
Oh, gotcha.
Because you are born with somewhere in the neighborhood of a quintillion possible neural connections. Whatever you don't use by the time you're age 4, you lose. And most people lose almost half of those that aren't used. So why is early childhood education so important? If children are raised with empathy, they tend to grow up as empathetic human beings. If they are raised with abuse and severe extreme discipline,
Sensory deprivations.
that's what they tend to grow up and live with. I mean, you can change, there's behavior modification, but it's very difficult. And as I said, this idea of social empathy has been suppressed by the dominance of this self-interest frame. And it needs to be strengthened to us through framing. So, there's a foundation. So when we come back, there's some really fun stuff. I have some good examples. You're going to get to respond some more.
That would be funner.
More funner.
More funner?
More funner.
Yeah, more funner.
Can I ask one
How's that? Okay. All right.
I want to be able to give this.
By the way, the original Obama slogan, "Hope," was the best ever. Do you know why? Cognitively? Because hope trumps fear.
Hope trumps fear?
Yes. So when you have a very strong self-interest frame, such as the conservative, where you must be self-reliant, it tends to generate unconscious fear. Because if you are alone and you have no one else to support you, what happens if you all of a sudden you lose everything, or right? It generates unconscious fear, which is one thing you see conservatives propagate fear all the time. Well, there's a reason for that. It continues to systemically reinforce their self-interest frame. So one thing you can do to help offset that is to provide hope. One of the reasons community is so powerful, right? Community provides hope for people. If you live in a safe, prosperous community where neighbors look out for neighbors and you take care of each other, that provides hope. And it can counter fear. There's some, so, okay. So we're going to start with some fun, because now that the election's over, I can do constructive criticism and not reap the ire of certain people in the party. So a lot of people had this same question after the election. Where do we go from here? I mean, think about it. You look at look at what happened with the turnout. Huge turnout for Democrats. Like, huge turnout. Right? There can't be any more excuses about we just need to knock on more doors, or we need to, get into the, Milwaukee and Madison. Huge turnout in those areas. Right? There's something going on. Well, let's start from the beginning. If more people vote values and morals than issues, you should be able to distinguish one candidate from the other through their statements very clearly. This is not a trick question. Whose vision is that? Should I read it? Mm-hmm. So, a Wisconsin with a leading economy, a leader in the Midwest and among the top 10 in the nation. A public education system that's viewed as the best, producing graduates who have the skills and education to compete in the workforce. A state that has found ways to balance job creation with protecting its natural resources, especially in areas like agriculture and mining. Doesn't matter.
Mary Burke said that.
I think Walker.
Seems like a problem, doesn't it?
Yeah, because there's so much.
They're so similar.
Let's start from the beginning. The first, we'll do both campaigns. So first of all, the first thing a campaign does with its first communications is establishes the frame. The initial days leading are the most important because it establishes the identity and the values of the candidate. So this was the first Walker ad. Most of you probably, it's titled Anthem. Right away, people related it to Ronald Reagan. Interesting. Pay attention.
It had gotten pretty bad 4 years ago. Over 130,000 jobs lost. Deficit over $3 billion. And taxes going up. Wisconsin's future looked dark. But it's different now. Wisconsin has turned around. The deficit is gone. Taxes are lower. And more people have gone back to work. Kids are going to college. Families are planning vacations, and more are going to sleep knowing they have access to health care. Unemployment is below the national average, and we're investing in worker training to prepare people for the jobs that are available. The goal is that everyone who wants a job can find a job. Less dependence on government, more dependence on individual hard work and pride. That's progress. That's what leadership feels like. And thanks to Governor Walker, Wisconsin is back on.
Right after lunch? Really?
But did that, knowing what you know now, did that commercial sound different?
It sounded like that in the beginning.
Well, in terms of what you pulled out of that
Right.
commercial, what was important? Oops, sorry. Don't want to.
Not buying his Brooklyn Bridge.
I already took your training once, so it doesn't count. Because I already knew what to learn.
Oh, okay. Well, here's the important line, right? The goal is that everyone who wants a job can find a job. What does that say about people who don't have a job? Less dependence on government, more dependence on individual hard work and pride.
You're on your own.
The other thing that it said that was really important was it said this is what leadership feels like. It's not,
This is what democracy looks like.
right, this is what leadership feels like.
That's what that
Oop, I'm sorry.
sickening feeling in my stomach is.
There you go. So let's look at how that evokes the conservative frame. First of all, he is the embodiment of the conservative moral frame. Any visual, his name, repeating a quote, activates the entire frame. That's what's happened. He is the embodiment of the strict authoritarian father. Do you know why? What was the first thing he did? No. When he came into office, what was his first action? Punished the unions. Remember that quote that he made that everybody was all angry about, where he compared the protests in Madison with defeating ISIS? Why did he say that?
He'll punish them the same way he punished us.
What did Ronald Reagan do to the air traffic controllers?
Pat Cole, he fired them. How dare you screw it.
He punished them. And there are conservatives who believe that that's why we won the Cold War.
Right, yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yes, because he came out as the authoritarian. He's not to be messed with. And Walker said the same thing.
That's because that's what Rush told them.
No, it goes much deeper than that.
Oh, okay.
The idea that the public is immoral, you heard that. Less dependence on government. Individual hard work and pride. You make it on your own. If you don't make it on your own, tough. It's your own fault. Talk about spreading fear. Only the private sector can create jobs. That is moral. That is a moral statement by conservatives. If the public is immoral, they cannot create jobs. They only impede jobs. Critically important. And create jobs is now a metaphor. There's no such thing as job creation. No private business owner wakes up and says, I'm creating jobs today. We'll get to that later. It's a metaphor. If you don't have a job, right? Anyone who wants a job can find a job. If you don't have a job, you're immoral because you're undisciplined. And your unemployment and your poverty is your painful punishment for being immoral. Wow. So, Scott Walker is the moral conservative leader. So, yes, go ahead.
If you're a stay-at-home mom, does that make you immoral?
No, that makes you moral because it's the woman should serve the husband and serve the family. Yep. Traditional values, the woman stays home.
It'd be more moral if you had
If she's
selling marriage.
single, then she's a pariah, because then she's getting.
If she's a single mom.
Oh, then that's immoral. Right, right.
You know, there's an interesting thing that I discovered when I was dealing with this with actually some people in business. And that is that when I went back to the dictionary, and it was a current dictionary, this was 10 years ago, and I looked up the word value, there was no reference in the dictionary to any social dimension.
Really?
Value.
Interesting.
It was all financial and asset related.
Okay. Interesting. Common sense.
Oxford Dictionary.
Common-
Oxford Dictionary. I mean,
Common sense. Interesting.
What edition was that, John Ruff?
So let's look at how this relates to specific issues, because talked about how values are consistent along issues. So the economy. So these are direct statements from Scott Walker. Too many politicians seem intent on offering more of the same tired tax and spend plans that increase bloated bureaucratic red tape and make it harder to find jobs.
So harder to create.
Or harder to create jobs, sorry. Again, this metaphorical idea, a tax and spend plan increases red tape, which does what? Makes it harder to find jobs.
Competes with private interest.
That's right. Here's another one. Your tax burden has dropped and more jobs have been created in Wisconsin. So again, taxes are a burden to private profit, private prosperity. So if you relieve that burden, more jobs will be created. Education. This is a big one for me. Allowing schools to fail means students are left behind. What is that saying? Well, it is right. It's right. You're leaving students behind. You're creating a metaphor for leaving. But
Not just
about
that.
schools, what does it say about schools?
They're amoral because you're left behind. With Christians, that triggers the whole.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes. Yeah. But bigger picture is,
Well, there's the assumption that
There's
they're
the
failing.
assumption.
thank you.
Schools are full,
The assumption is that schools are failing. Why do schools struggle to have students that succeed or to educate students? Why do schools
Lack
struggle?
of investment.
Lack of investment, other ones.
Poverty.
Other ones. The community. They're in a, right.
Community support.
There's a thing in conservative, the conservative frame, which is direct causation. Direct causation is also very easy in language and understanding. Everything has direct causation. Students do bad because schools are failing and teachers are terrible. Right? People are poor because they don't work hard enough. Sound familiar? Everything is direct causation. Guess what? That's not the way the real world works. We know that. The problem is there aren't easy phrases to describe systemic causation. So as progressives, we've got to start talking systemic causation. Okay? Communities are being divested. There are communities where people have not recovered from the Great Recession. There are, poverty has a huge impact on schools and learning from an early age. I mean, all this stuff contributes to these factors, and we've got to start talking about them more effectively because it's too easy to believe direct causation. It's easy to make the leap that the kids in Milwaukee are doing bad because the schools suck. And the teachers are terrible. The teachers are lazy, and the union protects bad teachers. You've heard all this. This is why. Direct causation.
And so in cities, when they say, not all schools, some schools, meaning urban, black,
Public. Public.
Well, and we all know that Milwaukee Schools is a racist meme in this state.
I don't think it's, see, okay, that's where I would disagree with that. It's not, first of all, it fits their moral hierarchy. Okay, the demographic population of the school, but it also, for conservatives, it's a function of the public is being immoral. And Milwaukee is, to them, this terrible example of government doing a terrible job. And
But that's the only place that has school choice, and that's the only place that's failing. So why don't those go together?
because the facts don't matter. If the facts don't support the frame, they reject the facts. And look, I can find you studies done by conservative think tanks that show that the voucher schools do better.
Well, of course, you can just say whatever you want.
School choice everywhere. You're talking about vouchers.
Well, and the other thing is, right, I mean, we have open enrollment.
Right.
I would say open enrollment has done as much harm to community schools as the voucher program. Just it's not as visible, and it doesn't have as direct an impact, but it still has a negative impact on strong community schools, because you're taking away from the very core of the community. And when you create choice, and I'm using a conservative word here, but when you create choice, you create unconscious biases in people. People make decisions based on deeply seated cultural, social, religious biases that they have no control over.
That's why it's so difficult to make those decisions.
Exactly. So, okay. So, we hear all this talk about education reforms, including transparency. You'll hear all this talk about transparency and accountability. Transparency and accountability are basically key words for punishment. The only reason conservatives have brought transparency and accountability into the conversation is they want to know who to punish. Who's doing a bad job? Which teachers are doing a bad job? Which schools are doing a bad job, so we can close them and then make them privatized, because that'll work out a lot better, because the public is immoral. That's what transparency and accountability is about. Choice, I just mentioned it. Choice is in the market frame, which is conservative, and it's one of the highest moral authorities in the whole conservative frame structure, is the market. The market is the ultimate decider, because you succeed and fail in the market based on your what?
Value.
Your moral discipline. So why don't banksters go to jail? Because conservatives think that they're moral. They deserve all that money. Yep.
I'm sorry, you started all that with choice as the word.
Creating choice. Conservatives talk about creating choice in education.
Yeah, choice is a marketing.
Is market.
Term, it's a capital
Right.
term. You have a choice.
But not pro-choice.
Well, no.
No, it is.
Choice is a bad.
Pro-choice is used. So progressives use pro-choice, and they are evoking the market frame, which pro-choice is a terrible message.
Yeah, pro-choice.
Because you're taking a choice market shopping versus life, which is a very moral. So
This is a very basic question.
Okay.
This is what's confusing me and holding me back. Are we, if we want to say a progressive music then,
progressive education. Yep.
Are we supposed to use, in order to communicate with Republicans, are we supposed to use their frame and put it out? Or are we supposed to create a new frame?
We use our frame and communicate, which is, so you have because what you're trying to do is, you want to evoke the progressive frame in people. So you evoke progressive ideas because almost everybody has the capacity to understand progressive ideas, and you want to strengthen that.
Okay.
So instead
of choice, we would say.
We'll get to that.
Oh, it's killing me. You're killing kill it.
Good, that's good. The suspense is good.